Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my feminist book recommendations to give you guys some inspiration or ideas about maybe what you want to read for my International Women's Day Readathon on the 8th of March. If you want to know more about the Readathon, I will leave a link to the Twitter and announcement video in the description box, and also leave sort of all of the information, but also link the announcement video up here for you if you want to go and check that out. As a disclaimer, I'm just going to say these books are my personal recommendations of books that I've read that I think would be good for a readathon about women and equality and celebrating how amazing women are and feminism and all that stuff. So I'm just going to get straight into it and go through the books with you. I've got some fiction books, I've got some non-fiction books, I've got plays, I've got poetry, and I've even got a graphic novel. So I've literally got everything that you could ever want. So starting off with the fiction books, the first book I'm going to recommend is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. If you don't know about this book, it's basically a feminist dystopian novel, and this is set in a sort of dystopian world where women have one option, and that is to breed. So you've got a sort of household with a sort of man and his wife sort of looking after the house, and then you've got women in the house doing chores and things like that, but they're also meant to breed with the man of the house and create babies. But it's a lot deeper than that. Loads of other things happen. It's very feminist in its prose and ideas, and Margaret Atwood sort of uses what women are kind of going through today, an idea of suppression, and has turned that into an amazing classic dystopian book. The next book on my list is another very similar kind of book, and that is Power by Naomi Alderman. And Naomi Alderman was, I think, Margaret Atwood's like PhD student or something, and you can definitely tell that when you read this book because it's got very similar concepts and ideas. And I would say maybe if you love The Handmaid's Tale, you might not enjoy this as much because you might think it's kind of a rip-off. But I read this before I read The Handmaid's Tale and I really enjoyed it. And again, this is set in a sort of dystopian world where women wake up one day and realise that they have power. And that power is to like inflict pain or death with sort of their hands. It's sort of like an electrical kind of current, but it's not really gone into that much, but you can tell that's sort of how it's done through like their hands. And this book follows a couple of perspectives from women in this world who sort of, you follow what they decide to do when they discover this power, but eventually all the men in the world kind of lose power, and it's women that have a hold over men. And it's a very interesting concept, and see sort of like what Naomi has done with that. I'll be honest, this was actually quite terrifying reading it, sort of this concept of women having power, and because of what's happened to them in the past in terms of suppression and inequality and things like that, why they then go on to act the way they do. And it's just so interesting, and I really enjoyed this. So again, this is definitely one I would recommend. The next fiction book on my list is a personal one for me, and that is Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. So not only is Daphne du Maurier one of my favourite female authors, but the main character in Jamaica Inn is one of my favourite female characters in a book ever. This book follows a young girl called Mary Yellen whose mother dies, and when she dies, she then goes to live with her aunt and her husband in the inn they run called Jamaica Inn. And from the first night she's there, she realises there's some dodgy goings on, she's not happy about what's going on, and she starts to sort of question things and kind of fight against her uncle, and those are very interesting things. And that's why I've put this on my list, because Mary is a very powerful, like, angry, feisty young woman, and rather than letting her situation sort of get to her or realise the bad things that are going on in this book and sort of just accepting it and like ignoring it, she fights against the system, and it's like, no, I'm not having this. And her actual reactions are normally quite sort of angry and shouty and like, no, I'm not doing this, no, 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 no. And I love that about her, and I think it just shows that she's just a very strong main character, and she goes through some other things in this, and there's a romance which is also really lovely, and that's why I decided to put this one on the list, because Mary Yellen is just awesome. Moving on to the one graphic novel I have added to this list, and that is Heartstopper by Alice Oseman, Obviously it is written and illustrated by Alice herself, but it also contains a story about LGBTQ+ characters, and that's also really important. So that's why I decided to put this one on this list, because Heartstopper is an amazing graphic novel series and Alice is amazing at like her illustrations and her storytelling, and just everything that happens in these books is just so good. And if you didn't know, this graphic novel series follows Charlie and Nick, who go to the same high school, and Charlie is out as gay in his high school and Nick is known to be straight. And they become friends, and Nick starts to sort of think that he might not be straight, and he's sort of discovering his sexuality through the help of Charlie as his friend, and then they sort of evolved into a relationship, and it's just so wonderful and cute. Obviously this is also a great recommendation for a 24-hour readathon, because you can read these in about 15 minutes. Because the story is really interesting and the art style is quite sort of simple, so you don't have to think about it a lot and you can just speed through them. So you could probably read all three if you wanted to in 24 hours. Moving on to the play that is on my list, I recently finished this, and that is Fleabag by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. So there's so many reasons why you could read this for International Women's Day readathon. I'm just going to list all of the reasons. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is a feminist female scriptwriter. So not only has she written Fleabag, that then went on to become a massive TV series with the main character that is played by Phoebe herself, and also just shows like a perspective of a real woman in today's society and all of the things that we do but society probably doesn't think we do. So that's awesome. Not only that, she's also written another TV series called Killing Eve, which you guys obviously know about, that follows two main women characters. One of them is a psychopath and assassin, and the other one works in MI5 and is trying to catch her, but they're secretly so in love with each other. And it's just fantastic, and who wouldn't want all of those things? So the fact that Phoebe Waller-Bridge has brought these two amazing shows and play and herself into today's society has just made me so happy. And that's why I added Fleabag, the actual sort of written play, onto this list, because what's more feminist than a play that is Fleabag that is also written by Phoebe Waller-Bridge? That's all I've got to say. The next one on my list is a poetry book, and the reason why I've chosen this one is probably because it's not very well heard of. There's a lot of other sort of feminist poetry books out there that are very well known that I'm not really going to go into or mention, but I thought this one was particularly interesting to add, and that is Witch by Rebecca Thomas. So Rebecca has written sort of feminist poetry in three different forms. There's hexes, there's spells, and then there's sort of like stories themselves, and it's very raw and open, and she talks about the female body, she talks about female sex and sort of all of those things that in today's society should be talked about more, and she's just so very open and quite honest about it. It's definitely not censored, it's in your face. She uses words that probably make people sort of go a bit and I think that's why I really like this, because she did not hold back at all. I'm just going to read a little bit from the blurb as well, because this is what made me want to read it, and it kind of explains what Rebecca does with her poetry. These are poems as spells. Spells against suppression, silence and obedience, hexes that cling to your body like sweat, full of a messy, violent joy, a small, bright, filthy song. After reading that, I was like, yes, need this poetry book in my life. Definitely had to add this one to this list. The last section I want to talk about are non-fiction books. I've got quite a few in this section because I do really like reading feminist non-fiction books, but we've got a range of sort of like short and thicker books. But to get started, I want to talk about We Should All Be Feminist by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I read this a couple of years ago. It is super short. It's like 50 pages. Yeah, it's exactly 50 pages long. And it's basically Chimamanda talking about how everyone should be feminists and her reasons why, and she's so eloquent with it. If you've never really gotten into feminist non-fiction, I would definitely recommend this one. The next book on my list will be no surprise to some of you if you have watched my videos on my channel, and that is Feminists Don't Wear Pink and Other Lies. Yes, this is quite a chunky book for a 24-hour readathon, but it's in very small sort of like sections, so you can actually read through it very quickly, and the small sections are sort of very short little essays from various different famous women about what the word feminism means to them. And I loved every single second of this book. I gave it 5 stars. It was one of my favourite books of last year. It also made my favourite books of the decade, and I couldn't make this video without recommending this book. The next non-fiction book on my list I haven't actually read yet, but I felt like I really needed to include it, and that is Everyday Sexism by Laura Bates. And I believe this book started when Laura or someone on Twitter started a sort of hashtag of everyday sexism, and it went mental. And then I think Laura realised, right, this is insane, I need to write a book about it, because I didn't realise all these people have these stories. And that's why I cannot wait to read this book, because I've definitely done an everyday sexism hashtag at least twice on Twitter that I can remember, and probably still would today if I felt that way about something. And I've just flicked through it and I've seen that there are some tweets mentioned in it as well, which is interesting. I was kind of hoping that that would happen. This might be a bit dense to read for a 24-hour readathon, but I just really wanted to add it to this list for any woman that has experienced everyday sexism and might want to sort of educate themselves on this. And last but not least is a very random non-fiction sort of autobiographical book. And again, I talk about this a lot on my channel, but that is Happening by Annie Ernaux. Now, Annie is a French author. She does write non-fiction quite a lot, but in Happening, she sort of goes back to a time in her life when she was 21, she was at university, she got pregnant and had to have an illegal abortion. And this really surprised me when I read it. So from telling you what this book is about, and from when I read what it was about, I expected it to be really sort of quite sad and depressing and thought-provoking, and it is thought-provoking, but Annie has an amazing sort of way of writing about this very horrible part in her life in a sort of feminist, angry, but also positive kind of way, and I was not expecting that at all from this book. It also includes extracts from her diaries from when she was 21, so she includes extracts and then sort of discusses that day as she is now, like 40 years later, and it was just a great read, and I just want everyone to read this because it was just so different and so interesting. So yes, would definitely recommend this one, and also it is very short. I think it's about 75 pages long, so again, perfect for a readathon. So those are my feminist book recommendations. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and maybe got some ideas of maybe what you want to read for the readathon. Obviously this is not a very extensive list, so please leave a comment down below on what you would recommend as a sort of feminist book for an International Women's Day 24-hour readathon, because I would love to add more as well to my wish list. I just love reading feminist books, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, plays, poetry, as you can tell from this list. That's all for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon in a week or so for the International Women's Day readathon, which I am very excited for, which you can probably tell. And my TBR video will also be up soon, in a few days or so then you will know what I will be reading. Like I said, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!